What's going on, everybody? So today we're going to be talking about Maxine. So 2 years after the release of Pearl, Ty West gave us the conclusion of the trilogy with Maxine starring Mia Goth. I love the first two installments, the first being more of an allegory of fear of age and sex, and set in like the 70s with that nasty, almost grindhouse style of horror. And the second film, very distinct in Technicolor with bold, beautiful colors, with the setting being 1918 at the butt end of World War I, that kind of talks about morality. Personally, it's hard to tell which I prefer more, but I think I prefer the former as the latter is just barely edged out, but regardless, to me, both are really close in quality. Maxine has a lot of strong elements that makes it a lot of fun, and stylistically, it captures so well the era that it's set in. It fully leans into that 80s gritty, synthy, shadowy imagery that is silhouetted by neon lights. Like, there's a lot of moments in the movie that feel like a reel plucked straight from the 80s, and the movie allows you to just absorb so much of the set design, the costumes, the outfits, the hairstyles, and of course the cars. Generally speaking, all three movies flawlessly capture the time period they're set in and easily enraptures you in its world. So it's no surprise this movie isn't an exception. Also, this movie does a great job at making sure you don't confuse the characters of Maxine and Pearl. Despite obviously having the same face, these two are very distinct characters. In the first movie, Maxine was a happy-go-lucky, joyful character without really any hardening of life yet. Obviously, after the tragedy she endured by the end of that film, here she's far more conditioned to be able to look after herself. Especially considering we're talking about the sleazy, murky abyss of California in the 80s. So it's actually fun to kind of expect other people to mess with her because you as the audience are kind of worried for the other guy. Mia Goth's ability to play a multi-dimensional character was definitely a good thing because even though she's this psychotic, fierce killer, she still shows smaller details that surface up. Like, for example, her meekness and fear when speaking to people that are in a position above hers. Oftentimes, when Elizabeth Debicki is talking to Maxine, it almost looks like Maxine is like a child that's about to get in trouble, which is very relevant to the story because we know that she doesn't want to lose this opportunity that she's worked so hard for. And while on the topic, Elizabeth Debicki is so good in this movie. Every time she's on screen, her presence is powerful, arrogant, but not annoying, and you sympathize with her character when she talks about what she's had to do to get where she is, as well as her critique on Hollywood ironically repressing art, even though that's kind of the whole point of Hollywood. She's just a standout, and I really wish we had more screen time with her, but she's not the only character that I feel that way about. Giancarlo Esposito is this lawyer, mentor role for Maxine, and he's just also such a great character who deserved so much more screen time, but the little bit that he's in it, he's great. The way he's able to play her mentor or confidant that really cares about Maxine and also not minding to get his hands dirty for her overall success in Hollywood is just resonating. One of the scenes that stuck with me was when Maxine barges into his office and he consoles her and reaffirms how far he's willing to go for her. And let me tell you, you will see how far he's willing to go for her slightly later with a killer car scene. Sure, at the end of the day, he's her agent, and of course, money is a factor, but that selfishness never really comes out, so it makes the performance that much more compelling. And of course, probably the most cartoony, silly, but honestly great antagonist to Maxine is Kevin Bacon's character, the annoying private eye that becomes a piece of gum on her shoe that she can't get off. His delivery and performance is probably the most over-the-top campy one of them all, but honestly, he never feels like he's dragging the film down. In fact, his tenacity is what really consistently keeps the ball rolling for the plot to progress, and overall you could tell that he had the most fun with that character. It's good to see him finally rep horror again, since for so long he really didn't, considering he's in the Friday franchise. The theme and duality of the horror genre with the adult industry was such a neat touch as well. It was cool to see how the movie used the adult industry as a metaphor for how actors have historically used the horror genre to catapult their careers, while at the same time they struggle to get their big break because of their ties with horror. There's many examples of that being the case tragically. Hell, one of the examples is Kevin Bacon himself, but regardless, I did enjoy that hurdle that Maxine was facing because of her involvement in the adult industry. The cosmetic appeal of touching base with so many horror movies from the 80s was really cool and exciting, and you see a lot of references. Even a joke that was a bit tongue-in-cheek that was about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but twisted because it's relevant to Maxine. And to be honest, the references were even outside of horror. Like, during one of the chase scenes, I'm pretty sure we were on the set of Back to the Future, which was really cool, but I think retroactively it harmed the film. The movie has many scenes where it stayed lingering too long on these sets and felt more like fan service to showcase these places rather than actually having any relevancy to the actual narrative. While yes, it is really aesthetic and impressive to see, the overall storyline and performances all take a hit. Like Mia Goth's performances in both X and Pearl are freaking unreal. Here, because the movie doesn't feel as focused on her character anymore, her performance is just not as memorable or strong despite still being the same character, if that makes any sense. And that's the thing, Maxine no longer feels as interesting. I consider the first two films primarily as chapters of a character study and the background and settings secondary. But the reverse is the case here. The flashing lights and noise of the 80s are more important than the actual story. Honestly, it might have helped to have Mia Goth help write this film because, after all, she knew the character better than anyone, and given how much of Pearl was creatively driven by her, shows she knows how to make a character be fascinating. Obviously, Pearl isn't Maxine, it's the insight that would help make this character better. Another thing is the gore and violence. There are two nasty, gnarly moments that are really well done. The frequency of the gore is just really low, and it's not what I was expecting if your whole thing is to be set in the 80s, which is known for having slasher films that have a bunch of kills. And this was a perfect opportunity too, because it was supposed to emulate the 80s, which is known for having practical effects being used in most kills because CGI really wasn't as evolved back then. I did want to say that I really appreciated the nod to the subgenre of giallo films, with the giallo-esque nature of the killer, with the black gloves not showing who he is, and leaving essentially a trail of clues along with the bodies. And even the music with the quick, close framing shots of the stabs all felt very appropriate and faithful to the genre. But sadly, the reveal of the killer was very unsatisfying and almost felt like the movie realized that it was getting towards the end of the movie and it still hadn't resolved the murderer, so it made the third act feel the weakest and too many ideas were crammed into it. It could be because this film felt the most like a drama out of the trilogy, that there was large chunks where not much was going on, so it congested the plot and it made the ending feel rushed. The whole religious heretic subplot with the satanic practices came to a boil by the end, and it really just felt lackluster. And just it didn't feel like it had a place in this story, considering this is Maxine's conclusion. And I understand that this is her past catching up with her, but it didn't feel natural. More so, it felt like she got blindsided, since this has never been a threat in her two movies. Honestly, without going into too much detail, it didn't even feel like Maxine knew how to interact with the guy. More so, it felt like this guy just walked on set from a different movie. But the thing that was the biggest disappointment for me was the action bit involving guns in the final act. I hate guns in horror movies. It just feels like it removes the entire horror element for me, and even the tone of the film shifted during it because all of a sudden they were throwing unfunny quips and it just felt so corny. I hated everything about it. I think one of the biggest tragedies of this series is that they filmed back-to-back X and Pearl, and Mia Goth and Ty West kinda had the wheels churning, so they felt like more cohesive stories as well as more on target to what they were trying to say. When the juices are flowing, it's easy to keep going, but sometimes taking a break will obviously stop the momentum, and because of that, this film feels like a significant step down. It probably didn't help that for this one, Mia Goth didn't have any writing involvement, which she did have in Pearl. In general, Maxine is an anomaly where she's the final girl, but she's also not really the hero. So she carved her own path, and because of that, it makes her stand out among any other final girl. Oftentimes, you either root for the final girl or the villain like Freddy and Michael, but she checks both those boxes off. So to me, she's still one of the most complex fascinating characters in horror. Ultimately, I don't know if she deserves the ending that she got, but I'm not mad either because we saw the amount of turbulence that she endured. Overall, Maxine didn't bury the trilogy for me. It's still a fun time, and I would definitely rewatch all three of them. And just because it wasn't the most satisfying ending doesn't mean that Maxine isn't an iconic character, and I feel like she will stay memorable long after. But that's about it for me. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe. My name's Anthony, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.